I'm looking over here. I'm starting to think this might be the place over here.
That might be like people can see your figure collection there.
Yeah,
Is at your office.
I got crap everywhere. You know that, right? Okay, I think I got it.
All right, we're good. How's it going, everybody? This is the Uncanny Omar, and with me today is a man that should not need an introduction. I think most of us that have read comics for a long time have gotten into collected editions for a long time. But just in case, this is Dan Didio. How's it going, sir?
Good. How's everything with you?
It's going great. It's going great. Had my daughter had field day today. She's in the 5th grade. I have one that's in the 8th, so I did it for her when she was in the 5th grade. So they'll be going on to high school and middle school next year, and it just breaks my heart that they're getting that old.
Oh, listen, I've got 5 grandkids.
You've got 5 grandkids. That's crazy, dude.
Yeah, exactly. So my youngest son just had twins, and my oldest granddaughter my oldest granddaughter just had a first recital, so I'm getting a chance to get video on that. So great, it's a lot of fun to see, you know.
So you've been working in the comic book industry for a long time, but before that, you had worked on animation too,
right?
You come from that. So would you say that was mainly your background, coming from TV and then moving into comics?
It's interesting, you know, because I mean, if you look at breaking it down evenly, I did about 20 years in television and about 20 years in comics. You know,
okay.
So you know, I started at CBS, worked as a page on a number of shows back then. Then I worked my way through ABC, you know, and I was in publicity for a while with the soap operas in New York, and then I moved over into animation. Then I worked over with a company called Mainframe. I was their SVP of Creative Affairs, so did a lot of their development and a lot of their sales. And then from there, I went over to DC, and you know, that's when, you know, that was probably I got settled the most. You know, I was at DC for 20 years.
Okay, so a couple of things before the show got started. I had to most of y'all probably know my wife is a huge fan of Reboot, so I had to get her to meet the man that canceled her favorite show, because that's something we've always heard. And she was like, what? So my daughter, she'll come down here in a little bit to say hello, because she's a huge fan of Reboot.
Oh, that's awesome.
But I mean, we cannot look over the fact that you were voted Man of the Year at one time from Wizard Man. You were in Jim Lee.
For
work at DC Comics.
It's an interesting thing, because that's when I first started at DC Comics, and
right.
To be honest, DC had and when I first got there, DC had an adversarial relationship with Wizard, and they just wouldn't get along. They would do very little together, and one of the first things I wanted to do was repair that relationship, because for good or bad, Wizard was definitely a tastemaker in the comic industry, something that we really haven't had since then. And it was a way to get out there and get people excited about your product and build some advanced knowledge of your material. So went to great lengths to do that. And at the same time, I went to a greater level of effort, really trying to reestablish a lot of relationships with a lot of talent. And they saw the efforts that were taking place, and I think they recognized it in that fashion, you know.
So this all goes back, like, it keeps going back and forth, because I feel like there are some things I grew up with. So you worked on Reboot on season 3 mainly. We talked a little bit.
Actually, if you want the truth, I was the executive of Reboot at ABC. So that was my show. So I actually worked on every single episode. I mean, the fascinating thing about Reboot, what happened was I started in ABC Children's Television, and I inherited Reboot, which was the first computer animated series, and literally I was just learning animation, and here I am thrown into computer animation, which nobody really had a grasp on. And we had a lot of problems at the start. And what we realized after we had already launched the series and struggled through the first 4 episodes was computer animation is actually closer in some ways to live action than it is to cell animation. The way it's constructed, the way it has to work. You're working on closed environments, closed sets, and closed amount of props. So once we changed our logic, we went back and actually rewrote the entire series so that it was written as a live action show instead of an animated series. And when we did that, that's when the process started to get sooner, and the energy level started to pick up in the shows too.
Okay, so here's how everything is connected.
Okay.
And a lot of people, I don't know if they realize this, and maybe they make connections later on. So you had Len Wein and Marv Wolfman come in and write episodes of Reboot, and there was somebody else that, because I mean, comic book world, right? But they were also screenwriters. Beast Wars was the show that I got into, part of the Mainframe,
absolutely.
family. So now it was like some of these comic book creators are writing Beast Wars, and I was like, this is crazy. It's amazing. I mean, yes, JMS wrote some Transformers episodes in the 80s and eventually went to write comics, but it wasn't like he was writing comics then and went to write Transformers. This was the other way around. This was like comic book creators I grew up with are now writing these amazing shows. And I thought, it's all connected. Like,
listen, you know what? I could give you a couple of connections. You want some connections? First one was when I was ABC Children's. I got to be known as the comic book guy when comics. I'm an ABC Children's Television 94 to 96, somewhere in there. Okay. Everything's going crazy at the time. I remember getting pitched by Jim Valentino and his agent Shadowhawk on ABC Saturday morning. I remember somebody pitching me Scott Lobdell as the creator of X-Men because he had written #1. There's a lot of weird stories that took place. But what happened was I was developing a lot of comics for Saturday morning, and I actually had an action block built of the Metal Men that was developed by Louise Simonson for me, working with Jeanette Kahn and everybody at DC. That's when I first met everybody at DC. First time when I was working at ABC. And then I was also developing Thunder Agents as an animated series. And I brought Marv Wolfman and Tom Grummett in to do the development on that. And it was, I still have some of the art and pieces of that, but it was one of those things that I was using my comic knowledge of who I knew, bringing people into what I was working. So the guys that I met through there, and I met Len through Marv. And then when I went over to Reboot, I reached out to Marv and brought those over. And then Christine Marks joined us. And we had a really, really great group of comic talent who understood the type of storytelling I wanted to bring to the books. To the shows that we're doing. So that was that. But the other side of the coin is I used to bring them in and just pick their brains on comics all day long. I used to sit with Len and Marv, and we were supposed to be having a meeting on the show, and I'm asking them all about Crisis and how did that come together and all the backstories, because I love the history of comics as much as I love comics themselves,
Yeah. Well, through the years that you were at DC Comics, I guess it was 20 years, right? 20 years at DC Comics?
Almost 20, 18 plus. Yeah.
18 plus. Okay. Because it was 2020. That is the era that I came back to DC Comics.
Yeah.
The era, because a lot of people my age in their 40s stop reading comics at a certain time. And it's usually the 90s, right? Like the 90s is like you're graduating high school, and then you come in and this mess is going on in your comic books, and you're like, I'm out. I'm doing something else. And then something always brings you back. So I came back, and it was mainly because of Astonishing X-Men and New X-Men by Grant Morrison. Those are the books that brought me back in the comics. Right. I'm an X-Men guy. But I was like, I kind of want to go back and see what DC is doing. And during that time, it was right around the time, right before Jeff Loeb was about to kickstart the Superman Batman series with Ed McGuinness and eventually Michael Turner. And then you had this big thing with Jim Lee. Oh my gosh. I came back to comics and I'm like, what do you mean DC has Jim Lee? That's crap, man. He's an X-Men guy. What are you talking about? Yeah. And then I had to learn about the whole history of Wildstorm and stuff. So you had the Hush. You had that Hush story with Loeb and Jim Lee.
Right.
And then you guys did something that I found this guy named Jeff Johns, who I wasn't reading when I left comics, and I read when I got back into comics. And I'm like, who's this Jeff Johns guy? He's everywhere. He's writing Flash. He's writing Green Lantern. And so I read all his books, and I'm like, oh my gosh. And then Infinite Crisis crept up on me, and I rolled my eyes because I thought, this is so stupid. Why are we introduced the idea of multiple Earths again. We get rid of them. We introduce them. We had 0 Hour. And that's my favorite crossover of all time. Infinite Crisis was my favorite crossover.
It was something that I was building to in my first few years. And and honestly, probably still my favorite spot. I mean, if you look at when you first get to a job, you have an idea what you want to do, and then what you have to do is you have to get all the pieces in place to get to where you want to be. So I spent the first 2 years at DC not just building a team, but also building a plan and also a structure on how to execute the plan. Basically reworking the internal structure of the company itself in order to meet what I wanted to build. And Paul Levitz was incredibly supportive of that. I mean, don't get me wrong. He fought me tooth and nail because he really wanted to stress test everything we're going. But at the end of the day, I had his full support. So when we did that, and what we got to is probably my sweet spot is that spot from Countdown to Infinite Crisis to the end of the 52 weekly series. That's probably what I consider exactly what I wanted DC Comics to be during my tenure. And telling type.
All right, then I gotta ask the follow-up question that I know has been asked in the chat already, but I like the way that Chris said it best. Was it Chris? I think. Where is it? It was a really good question because during that time, it was Cody. Hey, Dan, of the 4 Robins, which do you believe is the most obsolete story-wise? Okay, so that goes back to my question of during that time, this is again rumors because that's when everybody was getting back into comics, was getting into forums, and everybody's like, oh yeah, Dan Didio wants Nightwing off the table. He wants to kill Nightwing. He hates the character. Like nobody had exact answers, and there wasn't like an exact quote from you like,
yeah.
Oh yeah, we need to go ahead and kill this guy.
First of all, I think it's cute is the only way I can put it about how upset people still are 20 years after me about something that I did not do. You're gonna realize people are still angry about something I never did, which is kind of intriguing. It leaves you scratching your head a little bit when you put it that way. But the truth is, when I first got there, it was all about Tim Drake. Everything at DC was about Tim Drake. People were writing it. Tim Drake was even smarter than Batman, which I was never comfortable with.
Okay, we can argue about that later.
Go ahead. You know what I mean?
I'm not going to go down that rabbit hole again. I get misquoted all the time on my channel. I'm not going to do that again.
But what I was saying is that at the time I got there, there was that Titans generation was a lost generation, I called it. They had already created a series of characters to replace every one of those Titans characters, literally. Bart had replaced Wally and all these guys, you know what I mean? And granted, Wally was the Flash at the time, but still, we were in this situation where all these characters sort of had their new replacements because ultimately these characters aged. So my first problem with Dick Grayson was he was aging and Batman wasn't aging, and ultimately there was going to be a point there where Dick Grayson was going to be older than Bruce Wayne, just on the way he was being written and the way his life was progressing and Bruce's wasn't. And I always used to say that one of the biggest problems at DC is that the universe ages. They used to age the characters, but the 3 primary characters, Superman, Batman, and Wonder Woman, didn't age. And every time that replacement generation got close, they either rebooted the line or created a new generation. So we had these log jams of characters that were replicating personalities and purposes within the universe. So that was my first issue. So Dick Grayson was in that spot. The next thing I had was that Nightwing was a series that was running for an extended period of time. And we have a lot of Nightwing fans, and this is where I get myself in trouble, but hey, it doesn't matter anymore. The issue with me with Nightwing was Nightwing had 125, 130 issues of an ongoing series, something like that. I always said to the Nightwing fans, could you name to me the big defining arc of Nightwing from that run of books? What's the big story? What's the story that sticks out in your mind?
Oh, Year Zero. That is a masterpiece.
Year Zero is an event. I'm talking about a Nightwing story.
Honestly, the Night in Bloodhaven, the very first 6 issues. And I'm sorry, I know that's not what you're trying to do. You're not trying to get me to add. You're not asking me. But I'm being honest. That 6 issues is brilliant. I love the way it was drawn. It was written. But I see what you mean. You're talking about a character that had 125 issues. But I mean, doesn't that have to do with also sales too, right? Like I don't know.
Yeah. No. Listen, it was good. I mean, and then the final point was I wanted the big death. In the original Crisis on Infinite Earths, they killed off Supergirl, which was a character that was created in the 50s and a major character. They killed off Barry Allen, who was the start of the Silver Age, right? Major character. I needed that death to have that level of resonance to make this series carry and matter the way it was supposed to. So I thought that the main story was Superman, Batman, and Wonder Woman were at odds. Who was the one character that could touch all three of them, that they all feel the same sort of relationship with and sort of care for, that if that character died, they would all basically share the equal grief. And Dick Grayson was that character.
Plastic Man. Oh, not Plastic Man. Whoops. Okay.
You know, funny you say that, but yeah, no, not Plastic Man.
Okay.
Anyway,
so yeah, that is something that I always heard. And I remember reading some of those issues of Infinite Crisis. I was like, oh no, here it comes. They're setting it up. So did you give it? I mean, I don't know. Okay. So maybe you can explain your role a lot better than I do. Of course, you worked it. So people understand exactly. Jeff Jones wrote the story. There are editors that he works with for Infinite Crisis. Let's just use that as an example. Did you at one time, in the position that you had, you were like, Jeff, I need you to kill somebody. Here's a list of people, or do you tell him, no, we need to kill someone? Like, I don't know how that works.
We did a meeting. It was Jeff, myself, Greg Rucka, and Judd Winnick took a meeting. And we actually built a kill list. We built a list of what characters could replace, which ones were there, which characters were redundant, which characters wouldn't be missed, which characters could change. We actually built that in advance. What I used to do while I was executive editor, my second role at DC, I started off with the job of vice president of editorial, which was this rather amorphous position that was basically supposed to manage talent in between Vertigo, Mad, and DC. But once you realize your job, you realize 90% of the job was really DC, and the other ones were just portions of it. So ultimately, that job was something that it wasn't meeting my expectations of what I hoped it to be, and it was a little frustrating in the job. And I was getting ready to leave. I actually was going to resign, or did resign, after the first year. But I presented a manifesto of saying, but if you continue, this might be a way to do it. And I presented methodologies and replacements and how to reorganize and ideas on moving forward. And that's when Paul basically said, I'll do everything you want to do except for a couple of your suggestions. But what I really want you to do is take the executive editor position. And that's when he offered me the job. And I didn't go in there looking for that job. I never thought I would have it. I didn't think I was qualified for it, to be honest with you, because the people who had that job in the past were all people who had worked their way up through editorial. And while I had editorial experience, it was not in comics, it was in TV. But I'd be a fool to turn it down. So I took it. And you brought up Jim Lee before, and Jim Lee's important to me in the early days, because I kept on saying about how essential Jim Lee was. And I even have a document somewhere that said Jim Lee should be the face and voice of DC Comics. He's the person they trust most. And it's so interesting to see us at that point now. But the reality was Jim Hush was in motion when I first got there. It was already up and running. It was being put together by Mark Chiarello in an editorial role. He was constructing it originally as a series similar to Long Halloween. It was supposed to be a standoff, a mini series. And it was Jim that said, no, I want to be in the main book. The only way I can be the Batman artist is to be in the Batman main book. And I never forgot this. To this day, I never forget this. It was Jim that says, he goes, Jim, they go, listen, but Jim, you don't get a #1. He goes, I said, you put me on the main Batman book, I'll make number 608 sell like a #1. And just with that level of confidence. And all of a sudden, it all made sense to me. It made sense, the talent on the regular books and putting the focus on the main books instead of all this other stuff that we're doing on the sides is where it was going to work. And when I got to DC, everybody was worried and wanting to do Elseworlds, and they wanted to do their miniseries, and they wanted to do their hardcovers, everything away from the main line. And Jim brought the focus back to the main line, and I followed him right behind there. And honestly, all of a sudden, Jim made working on the main books cool again. And all of a sudden, we got talent wanting to be the main artists. And now the books that are driving the monthly schedule are being elevated and feeling important. So that was a moment we said, oh shit, this can work. But what I used to do is I used to build at the beginning of every year, I used to build a manifesto. I used to call it the manifesto. And it would be a plots for the entire year, the blueprint for the entire year laid out with high points, crossover points, and everything like that. I used to talk to the editors and writers, build the whole thing, construct it, figure out how the whole thing worked together as a story. Boom. And then I'd send it to Paul. He'd say, yes, no, yes, no, yes, no. Go back in, rework it, get it approved, and then push it out to the editors, and the editors push it out to all the talent. And that's how we started to build a crossover universe, something that was a shared universe, because we were working from a document that gave everybody the opportunity to tell their own story, but also give points where they could cross over so it feels like a connective world, you know?
Well, I mean, and honestly, that's the way that I liked my comics growing up. That's the way that I liked my X-Men growing up. That was the way that I liked my Justice League. And because sometimes it does feel like you were reading pocket universes. So I thought it was a good idea to have. That's what editors are for, right? Like editors are supposed to guide you in the direction of like, this is the way the characters are supposed to go.
Right.
So during your time, you also wrote at these, because I remember the Metal Man series that you wrote. I mean, you didn't stay away from writing just because you were, doing a bunch of other things for DC Comics.
Well, actually, I went into writing more when I went more hands off the creative. One of the truth, when I was directing the line, I was much more hands on, and it didn't feel appropriate to take books for yourself. And I never had interest in doing main characters. I always liked the weird, quirky characters. So more when I came publisher, so executive editor, they are directing the line, working editors, and working with the talented choices like that. When you're with publisher, you're doing two other things. You're at the early stages of the production. You're at the let's get this to a point where we could greenlight it and agree that it's a project we want to go forward with. So you're on the front half. And then the only other time you really interact is when it lands on your desk for approval, yes or no. That's where it gets a little funky, because you have this conversation at the start, and then all of a sudden lands on something on your desk, and it's not what you thought it was. And you have to make a choice right there. Yes or no? Do we go backwards? Do we go forwards? Do we kill it? Do we bring it back? Do we just let it go? And if it goes, does it go off track, and does it take everything else with it? Those are the decisions you make every day. And you can do it. And I used to say a line fails not because of one book, but because death by 1,000 cuts. All these little things going wrong, and all of a sudden you see you're so far off your mark because you've made all these compromises along the way that takes the creative away from where you wanted it to be at the start. So it's hard to manage that because it's such a fast moving machine. And at its peak, we were putting out probably somewhere between 70 to 80 periodicals per month. When you think about it, it's impossible to manage all that creative. And not only that, it's also impossible to manage it as a single entity, because you would freeze yourself if you tried to line everything up constantly.
Would that have included the Vertigo era then? Like you're talking about DC and Vertigo?
No, I'm talking about DC. I'm talking about DC.
We thought the New 52 was a lot of comics in 1 month.
Yeah. We were right before New 52, right after the 52 weekly series. I think we hit about 78 monthly books at one point. Jeez. Between specials and one shots and
of course.
Yeah, all that stuff going on there. Yeah.
All right. So I have to shift this focus over now to something else that happened while you were there. Something else that was happening in the comic book industry when I came back to comics in 2002, 2003, especially 3 and 4, was this nightmare that would become my life, and I love it. But collected editions, Dan, collected editions in 2003 and 4 was heaven for us that grew up in the 80s with our copy of Batman Year One or whatever great Watchmen, right? Like whatever, because it's weird to explain to people that didn't grow up in that era that there were no collected editions. There were no, outside of the Marvel Masterworks line and the DC Archives line, right? There were no, if you wanted to read like what happened in the Punisher, if you wanted to read what happened in Batman, you had to get the comics, and that was it. Right. Because there was no trade paperback coming out every 6 months. And it's amazing to me what you know what was going on. Marvel had David Gabriel, and they changed everything up with the omnibus line, and then they had the Epic collections later on. And then DC did something that was unique to DC, because you know, I think in a business, you know, you always want to see the template laid out and like, oh, that's working for them, so let's try our own thing. We have our own omnibus stuff, but you guys had, oh, you can't see them, the absolutes. You guys had, and I'm sorry, I keep saying you guys. DC had the absolutes, but you were there when that happened.
Oh yeah,
how big of a role did you have in all of?
You know, that was really, you know, we were constantly looking at other formats in other countries.
Okay.
You know, if you want to know the truth, if you go to Europe, you'll see a lot of high-end collections. But our team, that's the nicest way to put this. Our team had an elitist point of view in regards to certain material, meaning that it was, you know. And they always felt it had to be handled in a certain way. And when we did absolutes, the rules of the absolutes are a lot different than the rules right now at absolutes. They had to pass a certain stress test, or they had to have a certain amount of time, and they had to have a certain pedigree. And they had to there was a lot of things that held it to a high esteem. It wasn't just a format, which is ultimately what it becomes now because it's being created at an extended, accelerated rate. At that point, it had to be prestigious. We limited the number of absolutes per year. And then it was really a picking point of which ones made that list. And there was always an outstanding list because we put so few out. What happens later is, as you get pushed for revenue, a high ticket item with a lot of interest generates a lot of money. So therefore, there's more of an urgency to put out something with a bigger ticket price because it turns a quicker profit. But in those days, early on, the absolute was the cream of the crop, the top of the line, the most prestigious line of books with only the material that deserves to be in it, not just everything, you know? And, you know, and that was a switch that took place. But that was, you would have loved this, given your love of graphic novels. We used to have meetings, okay? And we had a room full of people, and we'd sit there and argue. It was the nerd fest of
that's my kind of argument. That's my kind of argument. I'll be right in the middle of that.
And we were sitting there, and there were pressure points. And I say this now, only a third of the books were allowed to be Batman related. You know, we had limitations in regards to how much of what we had guidelines, and then everybody submitted ideas to fit into the pot, and then ultimately what came out is what we collected. But there were things that did not make a cut, and they would come back to the next meeting with the same things, and maybe they didn't make the cut the next year. And that's the way it ran, because we did not want to oversaturate the market with collections. But during my time there, the tipping point occurred, the infamous tipping point. And what we call the tipping point is when the profitability of the company, more profit was generated off of collections than it was off of periodicals. And
which started the whole rumors of like, well, there goes any collected or any more monthly comics that you.
Yeah, but the truth is, you can't have one without the other. You can't have these collections because the sheer expense of the art and editorial was where the issue was. And then also, I could say this now because we can. The other issue, which is why you had this explosion of DC product, was there was a contract of there was a reprint fee associated with a large swath of books for an extended period of times at DC. Very cost prohibitive to collect them, meaning that we didn't expect high sales from them, so we could not afford the reprint fees against those books.
Okay.
So therefore, what happened is that we had a royalty system was net off a price. Don't want to get into too detailed on that, but the bottom line is that we changed some of the deals to reflect that net offer price deal, and some of the creators agreed to make these changes, and by doing so, it opened up the doors to collect more material. But there are certain books that won't be collected because it's cost ineffective because of the pre-existing reprint deal that was in place that was not changed.
Okay, well, one of the biggest rumors I've always heard was since I came back into the game and since omnibus editions were introduced, DC started doing their own omnis, and you guys did the Death of Superman in that standard size hardcover, and then you did it in the big oversized hardcover.
Right.
And I always wanted a Man of Steel by John Byrne, and that was one of the biggest rumors. Like, oh no, they can't do this because it's too cost effective. Like John Byrne's Superman run in omnibus format would not be profitable for DC. That was, again, in the era of forums, in the era of,
there might have been something holding it back at the time, but I think we worked all those deals out.
They did standard size hardcovers. I do have I've always wanted to know about the absolutes, but before I do, I gotta say thank you to Nick for the super chat, saying hi to one of my favorite YouTubers with Omar Near Mint and one of my favorite people in the industry, the old Double D. Is that what your nickname is? That's awesome.
Okay. True story is I actually did a little work for Nick during the early days back in the 90s beforehand.
Okay.
During when he went back in during the Dynamic Forces day, and we had the Creators Universe cards. So Nick, I was just looking at the Creators Universe card set. Talk about reliving the old past there. So anyway, what's the question?
That's okay. Thank you, Nick. Thank you, and thank you for reminding people to hit that thumbs up. My question was: there was always this. This is again something I heard was the absolute editions weren't even supposed to be called absolutes. For some reason, it was supposed to be absolute authority, and then whatever the next book was going to be, it was going to be that first letter of the next title.
Yeah.
And for some reason, absolute stuck, and that's what became the absolute line.
As a matter of fact, when we did the All-Star line, the All-Star Batman, All-Star Superman, it was going to be absolute Batman, absolute Superman. I was shot down because the books were called absolutes, and I couldn't use the name for the comics.
Okay. So fast forward some years, and now you're working with Frank Miller, right?
Yeah.
Okay. So tell me a little bit about Frank Miller Presents, and we can take some questions from the chat.
It's a kind of interesting thing because it's just it's a way for Frank and I just to make comics. How about that? There's no. It's I wish there was this big secret thing, but the reality is it was during the pandemic. I was in touch with Frank. We were working on a project together. Or actually, I brought a project to Frank, and and I stayed in touch with them, and we always like talking. And as the joke goes, or as the story goes, he calls me up and he says, "Would you be interested in editing if I do a series of DC, would you be interested in editing it?" Now this is after I'm out the door, and I'm like, I'm not sure if DC would want me to edit it or not, but I went back and I said, but on the other side of the coin, if you want to do books, instead of going to another publisher, would you want to publish it ourselves? I said, I've never done it. You've never done it. It's a way for us to stretch our skill sets, try something new, interesting learning experience, which it has been. And he said yes, which completely threw me off. So he had a couple of ideas. I had a couple of ideas. And we put them together, and we started Frank Miller Presents with it. And reality is, it's not something that's going to be a company to compete with other companies, by no means. It's really just something for us to tell stories that we feel like telling. If we have and to find creators we want to work with. But for Frank, it's also about passing on the craft, talking about the craft of comics. He talks about his days, about how he was classically trained by Neil Adams, and how much Neil put him through the rigors in order to improve himself. He even talks about his time at Marvel, about working under Shooter, and the structure and regime that he worked in to produce the Daredevil comics just made him a better storyteller and writer and artist. And a lot of those skills that he learned, he wants to pass on to others. He feels a lot of the craft is being lost in comics. A lot of people aren't being taught. They're just being accepted, and people's pushing projects through, and there's a lot of mistakes being made. And not that it's to anybody's detriment, but there's so much of what comics are that feels it needs to be handed down. And so if part of him is he wants to work with people. And one of the people he's working with right now is he's working with Philip Tan, who has a long career and successful career in comics, but there's still a teaching that's going on between them, which is fun to see. And then he's also working with Emma Kubert about how with her and trying to work with ways. And Emma's a teacher at the Kubert School, but even still learning from Frank, and he's learning from her in the same way. So it's a fun experience, and it goes back to what we talked about earlier, which is the sense of community. I love the sense of community in comics, and I love the sharing. I truly believe comics work best as a collaborative process, a collaborative medium, not somebody working independently of each other. And I think you need to share that experience. I love working with really talented artists. No reason, no shock there. But the reason why I like it is that they could take what's in my head and find a way to visualize it in ways that I never dreamed possible. And whenever I see something that you thought and it appears on a paper even better than you thought it, there's something really exciting about that. And for me, I'm working with Danilo Beirut, and Danilo delivers on my Ancient Enemies books over and over again, something that's more exciting than I even imagined. So it's been a wonderful experience for both of us, you know?
Okay. So with the Frank Miller books and stories, what can be printed over there with Frank Miller Presents? Like, are we talking about things like Sin City? Or is that still Dark Horse? Or how is that?
Frank owns all his own stuff. You know, his creator-owned material he owns. Some of them he co-owns that are over it. So he would have, if he was to do something with that, he'd have to get his co-creator's approval. But Sin City he owns outright, and we have plans to do new Sin City material with Frank Miller Presents. He's actually developing it and about to start as a Western. Which I think is really fun. Frank will be writing and drawing that, which is the origin of Basin City, how it came to be.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
And this will be okay. So what about the old stuff that was printed?
The old stuff, the old stuff is still with Dark Horse. They just did a reissue of everything. So you know, which is good. So it's out there in the market. There's no need for us to worry about that. Really looking at new material. And the other thing Frank's doing is he wrote a Sin City script for Mila Manera. And Mila Manera is in the process of drawing it right now. And that'll be the first time any artist other than Frank has drawn something from the Sin City universe.
And Milo's a very talented artist. I love his, I have all his books. I'm a big fan. So
it'll be interesting.
Okay. What yeah, interesting. That's a good choice of words. A guy could draw beautiful women. I mean,
yes,
oh my
can.
gosh. Yeah. Oh my gosh. So then I have to ask, is there a thought about putting these in collected editions one day?
Oh, always. Yes, absolutely. Okay.
For any line at FMP.
Yeah, right? I mean, the interesting thing with Frank, and this is something we're talking about right now, because Frank's adverse to just collecting books as individual issues bound in a single volume, which is what collections basically are. He really wants to find a way to smooth out the stories, and whether or not we're going to create new material to create transitions from issue to issue, so it's a lot more seamless as one issue ends and another one starts. We're in this discussion right now, but we're thinking we want to do something different instead of just doing it and packaging it the way everybody else does. You know, we might default to that down the road, but right now we're exploring other ways to collect material because we can. I don't know how else to say it. I had that moment with Frank, as I tell the story. I had the moment with Frank. I was in his office, in his studio. We're up there just talking some ideas, and something came up, and I don't even remember what it is. And something came up, and I turned to him. I said, "Frank," I said, "Can we do that?" And it just came out of my mouth. I didn't even know what happened. I just said, "Can we do that?" And Frank goes, "Who are you talking to?"
Okay.
I said, I don't know. I just, it was a reflex. Like, oh my God, somebody's gonna bitch about it. And the reality is, we work to our standards and our beliefs, and I think we have good ones. And we're comfortable in what we create, which is even better. You know.
So the books published by Frank Miller Presents. Like, are you guys? Here's something that I said about you, Dan. I remember when the whole DC, when you left DC, when you were asked to leave or whatever happened.
Who knows?
The whole Diamond thing happened, right? Like after that, we had the pandemic and Diamond. Yeah. I remember doing a live stream and I said, say what you will about Dan Didio, he would have had a plan.
Oh yeah.
Instead of this email that everybody got, it was so confused. Everybody was confused. Like, what's happening? Like, there was no plan. It was like a bunch of people. I think that's when a lot of people started losing like that faith that they used to have in DC. When that happened, and then that email went out about leaving Diamond, they were going to figure out another way, and then out of nowhere it was Lunar, and it was just there was no plan. And there was no plan in sight. Marvel did the smart thing and took a step back and was like, we're going to wait it out and see what happens.
Yeah.
DC jumped in and was like, this is what we're going to do. We're not going to publish any books for a month and a half. And without telling the talent that was working on said books, it was a mess, man.
Yeah.
But I remember saying that, say what you will about Dan, like he'd have had a plan and before any email went out like that.
I probably would have been arrested. I would have went to everybody's house to talk to everybody, try to organize some little meetings. I actually, like I said, I love, I don't know, this work from home environment, I'm probably not cut out for. I love the interaction. I love the conversation. I love the give and take. I love the feedback. I love everything about talking to people in the creative environment. We talked about Reboot before. We used to sit in rooms and just yell at each other and scream and just this. And I used to call it the sheepdog and the coyote cartoon where they fight all day and they go have a beer afterwards. Creative
when they
process.
Talk out. That's right.
Yeah, the creative process is something that it's built on passion. You know what I mean? And compromise is good without sacrificing that passion. And I'm not sure where the passion is right now. That's my problem. And
you mean over at DC Comics?
And just when you listen, when I'm at home, I know where my passion is. My passion is at being at home and doing things at my house, and it's hard for me to focus. It's hard for me to focus. So I need to be in an environment where we're all sharing the same common goal, because that lifts you up on days when you feel tired and weak, and you feed off that energy in the room. And that I think that's so valuable. I can't explain, especially in a creative situation where it's a collaborative business. You really need that interaction, that immediacy of that interaction, not playing emails for 6 months, to get a yes or no answer on something,
Yeah, I think it definitely feels like it's a different type of industry and a different type of machine. And I think really, 2020 changed a lot of that too.
Yeah.
Because one of my favorite panels to go to any convention is the Marvel Bullpen panel. I love that panel. It's a bunch of, unfortunately, older people now that talk about these days that what I would have loved to have been a part of, like, hanging out at the office, doing all these goofy
You should have come to the DC panels during Infinite Crisis. You want to see?
Oh my gosh, I was so jealous.
They were raucous. They were screaming. Fans are screaming at us. We're screaming at them. We're having a blast. The greatest compliment I ever get off of a panel was some guy comes up to me. He goes, "That was the greatest panel I've ever seen." He goes, "I learned nothing about the line." I've never had so much fun attending something at a convention. I said, "Come on, that's where the joy comes from. It's all that fire, and it's you want people to care." I used to, and I say this today. I don't care if somebody loves it. I don't care if somebody hates it. Where I get most upset is where there's apathy, when nobody has nothing to say about it. When people stop caring, those are the fans you lose. Because the fans that say they hate you, they're going to still buy the book. As a matter of fact, they might buy two, one to rip up and one to read.
I swear that is the most truest statements. Like, oh my gosh, it's insane. Because I get to read all the comments that come through whenever I do like breaking news for Marvel.
Yeah.
And you see a bunch of negative comments, and then the book sells well, and they're like, well, we're going to do a volume 2.
Yeah, exactly. but apathy.
And I've always heard that in the industry, no matter what, don't worry when people are talking bad about you. It's when people stop talking.
And I feel people have stopped talking. That's what I feel in the business right now. And that's the thing that scares me the most, because when you lose people like that, it's hard to get them back. And when I hear stories about people selling their entire collections, that means they're cutting completely loose. They're cutting all ties. If they're selling the collection off and they're not enjoying what they're doing anymore, and they want to just remove it from their site, you've lost them completely. And that's a shame. That's a shame. Because ultimately what you really want is you want that level of engagement. When I first got there, my attack was not about it bringing in new fans. It's bringing in lapsed fans. You said it yourself. You were gone at the end of the 90s. I was gone at the end of the 90s. I said, but I knew there was a fan base that was there and hungry for product, and we had to find a way to reconnect with them. And that's what we did from when we started the stories from with Countdown that got us all the way into For the Crisis and past that, you know, and ultimately, whoops, excuse me a second. There we go. But it's my wife trying to call me, and she's going to kill me that I forgot to tell her we were doing this.
I may have done that before.
Yeah.
May have done that in
the house. She's not in the house. Hold it. She's going to. Could you excuse me a second?
Yes.
Hold on a second.
You go ahead and take that. I'll keep you on mute.
Hold on for 1 second here.
Yeah. All right. So I will be taking some questions from the chat. I'm going to round them up in a little bit, but I wanted to talk to Dan about things at DC first, and then talk about the Frank Miller Presents publishing company he's working for, or with Frank. So I'm sorry. So what is your role exactly now that you're at FMP? What is your?
So basically, we're doing soup to nuts. I'm writing solicits. I'm calling stores. I'm setting up panels. We're doing everything. It's only 4 of us as we consider the company. And so realistically, I'm handling all levels of production, all levels of everything, just to keep it moving. That's why we kept a very small level of books, because my bandwidth isn't what it used to be. But we're having fun. You know, we had some troubles along the way. We had a big delay between issues 2 and 3 of Ronin, part of our growing pains. And I'm going to give you an exclusive here. So here you go. So what happened was that we have a multi-month gap between issues 2 and 3. We just had a production collapse between the 2 books. The books look beautiful, but they took forever to create. So issue 3, which was supposed to come out 3 months ago, is coming out the end of June. But to get the book back on track, Frank actually stepped in and is going to write and draw the 4th issue. And it's already written and drawn. Okay. On track. So I'm really excited about that. But again, it wasn't about just, I got to make the perfect collection. It's about how do we get this book to be back there in the fans' hands with the people they want to see. And the good part is, Frank's been doing the layouts for Philip, and he's been working off of his layouts. So by Frank coming in, maintains the same consistency in the delivery of the story. It's the same layouts. It's just that he's actually fully penciled them and then inked them, and then Daniel Enriquez, who did the final inks and tones over Philip, is coming in and doing the same to Frank. And then Philip will come back for 5, and then we'll get into 6. But the goal was to get the book back on track, and Frank was adamant about getting the book back on track and stepped up to the table, man. And that's, it's comics. You know what I'm saying?
I mean, anytime people say delays, we know anybody that's collecting comics, we are very familiar with the delays.
Yeah, but we're good about it. So what I'm doing is I'm trying to get these books on track, trying to get the word out there. I'm also writing my series, which is Ancient Enemies, something that I'm actually enjoying more than I imagined I would. And I've been doing and created a bunch of characters as part of that, did some one-shots in association with it, and just doing some world building that I've always done with others, but never did the hands-on. So this has been kind of fun for me to be the hands-on guy on the world that's being built, and it's extraordinarily challenging, but it came a lot simpler to me than I imagined, because it's so ingrained in my system, not just from the DC days, but also from the reboot days, and just from reading comics for as long as I have. I understand how those stories are constructed. And that book is those are bigger comics too, though. Like, so it's prestige, the prestige format. But so our formats, we're all over the place on format. We're mixing and matching formats based upon concepts, page counts and all that. Frank's book, Ronin, it's done. Almost every page is almost like a double page spread. It's laid out double pages, might have multiple panels, but it's done as a double page spread. So it has this really large panoramic feel to it. So it's actually a thicker book, because you have a lot of single large images. So to move the story forward, we had to add more pages, Okay. And some people were asking about what other talent pool do you have lined up for Frank Miller Presents? Yeah, what I've been doing is I've been doing a talent search, and I'm doing it at conventions. I set up a rather aggressive convention campaign, because even though it's Frank Miller and myself, we only put out 1 or 2 books a month, and they get lost on the shelf in a store, or they're just pre-orders, and they might not even wind up on a shelf. So because of that, we've been going out to conventions and hand selling and making people aware of it. But I'm also looking for talent, because part of what I want to do and what Frank wants to do is, when we get to the second year, we have new titles. We want to bring in new talent for those titles, people that we haven't seen on books before, and people that he can work with and people we can work with, to give a different point of view and a different perspective and a freshness to what's going on. And there's nothing to say against anything, but a lot of talent has really gone on and mostly concerned with the projects that they own and create, which is wonderful. And for Frank and I, we want to bring in new people that we can help elevate new talent as well and give them an opportunity. So I found a couple of guys. I went to a convention in Mexico City. I'm already working with them on the Ancient Enemy series. And then we're looking at 3 or 4 new titles in 2024. And we're going to play mix and match with some of the other names we're finding. But we'll be looking for people all year long, and we'll make some decisions when we get closer to the end of the year.
You had me at convention talent pool searching, because that's old school. Most people are like, I think online, right? Like everything's
listen, it's you know what's funny is that we did talent searches all the time, right? And by the time you get to your 4th year of it, 5th year of it, you've seen a lot of the same people. You know what I mean? It's been picked a little clean. What's interesting right now is the talent pool, because of the pandemic, has been replenished. A lot of people were working at home, honing their crafts, doing things online, and finding ways to get this stuff published, but not as aggressively with the main companies, the bigger companies. So there's a lot more talent out there, and a lot more talent that's almost ready than I've seen in the last 10 years. And I think that's interesting. I think the only downside of it is that we're a small company, so we don't publish much. So I can't use all the guys that I like. But it's fun to see that many good people to be able to pick from now. And I'm only I've only done 3-4 shows so far, and I've got about 8 shows planned. So I'm only halfway through the line, and I'm looking forward to see what else comes our way.
This is a good question. If you had the power to bring any writer or artist to Frank Miller Presents, who would be on your top of the list, Dan? Any, doesn't matter.
It's hard to say. I never answered that question.
You've worked with a lot of people in your time.
Yeah, and also the truth is, we're still determining what books we want to do. So it's really about finding the right people for the right book, rather than the other way around, finding the person and then building a book around it. It's we're just trying to figure things out, because the other thing Frank and I are trying to do is mix genres. We don't want to just be doing a single genre line of titles. I'm doing, for all intents and purposes, the only superhero, and I'm going to put air quotes around superhero for me, superhero book, because it's not really a superhero book. It has people with powers, but it's not superheroes. And Frank's doing, for the most part, an anime style, manga style, science fiction adventure with Ronin, and then you have fantasy young adults with Pandora. Then you have film noir with Sin City. So we got these different blends here. You want to find the right people for the right mix. And the books that we're talking about coming down the road are going to be a different mix of books. Probably have a couple of books that are going to have a little more of a horror feel. So you want to find an artist that can bring that personality interpretation to the forefront.
Let's get a reboot of Reboot. Oh my gosh, I know my wife is yelling at that comment.
Yeah, you know what? It's funny, they tried to do that. I'm in touch with those guys all the time. Especially now. It's interesting. You mentioned Beast Wars to me. A lot of the guys are watching very closely the new Transformers movie. It has a lot of the same tonalities that the old Beast Wars show had. A lot of the characters from there.
Oh yeah, the characters are showing up in those.
Yeah. It's kind of interesting, because I got into mainframe when Beast Wars started. I was hands on with Beast Machines, because we had to do. That's when my first run in with Hasbro, which was a lot of fun. I brought Steve Gerber in, and boy, didn't know how much they hated Steve Gerber.
Hasbro did?
Yeah.
Really? I'm trying to think of. I know
it might have been from G.I. Joe or somewhere. I'm not sure where. There was some sort of history that I walked smack dab in the middle of it. I was a big Steve Gerber guy.
Yes, he was great.
Guy. And
when you were at DC, that's some of the last projects he did. Oh my gosh, he didn't get to finish that that series he was working on.
We did pretty good though. We did pretty good. We did a second. We did a full run, and then we did a slight mini series afterwards. I was happy to say we kept Steve working until he passed, which I think is all a creator really wants to do. You know, one of the good people.
Man, oh my gosh, and he was just ahead of his time with some of the writing he was doing. I remember how sad it was the introduction to the Man-Thing omnibus.
Yeah.
Talking about sitting at his hospital bed writing the introduction.
Yeah, no, I was Man-Thing was one of my. I was for Marvel. I was a big Marvel Monsters guy. I actually have a rather nice Marvel collection too, as you would imagine.
I can imagine. I can imagine. So there's some really good questions. Oh my goodness, here. This is a really good question from my buddy Josh, who's an amazing artist and writer. You accepting submissions for projects with already writer and artist teams?
Not right yet. It's something we talked about it because I had a couple of guys. You asked me before about people I want to work with. They did have projects they wanted to bring to us, but because we're so small and we don't have an infrastructure, it's hard for me to support projects properly. And it's one thing to drop the ball on your own things. I don't want to drop the ball on other people's projects. So I'm a little more hesitant to bring things in until I feel we're more on firm ground in regards to an infrastructure and maybe a little more support to get these things made. But that's a year 3 or 4. I would say we probably get there. We're not in any hurry. We really want to grow this small because ultimately it's not about trying to make an impact or try to be a competitor in the marketplace. It's trying to be making the books you're most comfortable and proud with, and that's the main thing. So the answer is we would be looking for that down the road, and hopefully we get to that spot.
This is a good follow-up question then, because I really like, because coming from this era of comics, so what are the chances of Frank reuniting not just with Klaus Janson on an FMP project, but somebody like Mazzucchelli, right?
Yeah, Mazzucchelli, Frank stays in touch with all his collaborators. I don't know if you know that. He stays in touch with everybody, and he talks to these guys. Mazzucchelli was a teacher upstate New York or something. I don't think he has much interest in comics anymore. But Klaus and Frank talk regularly. They're both New York. They both live in Manhattan. They have a shared birthday area time, and I know they stay in touch. And that would be one of my goals, is to see those guys working together again for sure.
Oh my gosh, that would be so awesome.
Yeah.
Especially for the old school.
Yeah.
Okay, so here's some personal questions. Wow, what is Dan's perspective on how Wally West was used in Heroes in Crisis? So before you answer that, who was your Flash though? Was your Flash Barry Allen?
Yeah, my Flash was Barry Allen. And I mean, the reason why we brought Barry Allen back, I hate to be just a corporate guy for a second, but we brought Barry Allen back because we had to. They had all these plans in place with Flash TV and Flash Films. It was all built around Barry Allen. So we knew we had to bring him back in a way. And we rushed it, which was probably the big mistake. We rushed it. But Barry was my Flash, and to be honest, by the time you read Wally West in the 2000s, Wally West is pretty much Barry Allen. It's almost the same character. He's not the Wally West that premiered that Flash book with #1. That guy was a completely different character. They brought him completely full circle, and I think ultimately it wasn't until they made Wally much like Barry that he became as popular as he did down the road. The Heroes of Crisis story, there was supposed to be a different ending than what occurred there. So it never really landed as probably as strong as it should have. But as anything, I stand by every story we take a risk on. You got to take chances. You got to take risks. Some of them work and some of them don't. I think it's more surprising when they do work than when they don't work, to be honest with you. And but you got to keep on taking those shots, because ultimately, when you're putting out as many books as you are, if you go out there trying to create a classic, you're setting yourself up for a disappointment. I think most classics are created accidentally. In some ways because of just the passion and the moment in time and just the alchemy about how a book is made. There's just certain things that come together perfectly and some things that don't. And And ultimately, now everything stands the test of time. Nothing goes away. You're constantly being judged against the past. Look at your wall. Everything that's being created today is being compared to everything against your wall right now. And in the older days, in the 70s into the 80s, people used to create comics and stories, and it was disposable. The only place you would ever read that story again if you found it in a back issue bin.
No, because we didn't have this stuff.
Yeah,
or digital media, right? A digital way of reading comics. We didn't have that stuff.
Once you create a story that's like Dark Knight, why would I want to read a story like Dark Knight when I could go out and buy Dark Knight at the same exact time?
I think honestly, Dan, I think I might be able to help with this answer, even though it sounds ridiculous. Because as fans, we love new things. We love it. Here's my example: House and Powers of X. I remember reading that weekly. I was like, "This is the best X-Men comic it's been since Astonishing X-Men." And before that, oh my gosh, it was 10 years before that. It was great. But then after a while, it's like, man, I miss the X-Men just hanging around the X-Mansion. And it's almost like I don't know what it is. Like this is why I thought the Rebirth era was one of the best eras of DC. I thought Rebirth was that mix of we're bringing it back to this pre-crisis, definitely pre-New 52 time. And where it had a lot of heart, a lot of hope. And Wally was kind of like a symbol of that. And it felt like going back home. And I think that's what we want sometimes, or what we need as fans. If you read it in a long time. So we don't, I always quote Garth from Wade's World where he says, "We fear change." It's almost like we do in a way. We don't need the characters. They can progress and, have character developments, but we don't need them I know it's weird, but we don't need them to grow in weird ways and then stick there for 5 years.
Well, we used to say the change, the illusion of change. That used to be the expression, the illusion of change, looking like you're changing something but not changing anything, and that's ultimately what people want. It's an interesting question because with Rebirth was always the escape plan from New 52. Always, that was always, and I'm going to say it from the publisher's point of view, okay? Because this is different. Because this doesn't have to do with creativity. This talks about sales and financial success. My problem with Rebirth wasn't the stories that were told, but when we did double shipped all of our key characters, it was one of the most successful times for us. But what it meant was that we limited the number of characters that we were willing to take risk and chance with. Okay. What I loved about New 52 wasn't the fact that we took away Superman's shorts. What I loved about New 52 is that we did a Man of War comic. We did a vampire comic. We did an Animal Man comic. We did all these crazy corners of what makes comics great in different genres and feels. And though we would not have been able to launch those series without the elevated success of the New 52 launch, lifting those books along with them, they wouldn't have gotten their chance. When we get to Rebirth, we basically say, we got about 20 characters that people love. Let's just put them out twice a month and call it a day. Now, the fans love it. The fans love it because they're getting twice as much of what they love. Mm-hmm. But what it does, it limits our potential and opportunity. Now, the right way to handle Rebirth would be to do what they used to do at Marvel, was introduce other characters, slowly build them, move those characters around from other series until they got an appreciable amount of fan interest, and then spin them off into their own series. Mm-hmm. But because we were double shipping, the creation process of those series were harder to do and harder to coordinate. So all the books started to get more isolated because everybody was working to their own schedules and independent of each other. So we lost the connective tissue between the universe. And that's when you did crossover, they felt forced. And not only that, extraordinarily disruptive because they had to hit at a spot where everybody's arcs were ending because everybody writes to a collection nowadays. Nobody writes to a story.
That is fact.
And ultimately, that's what is a little bit, it's a success moment, but it's an undoing at the same time.
Okay, so to take a step back, yes, I don't know what it's like. I was coming at it from a fan's perspective of what I like. So I don't know what sells work, right? And you're absolutely right because you didn't have Vertigo at the time because that went away. So the only way to have new books like that were either to restore Vertigo or to launch them with the New 52. And
Right.
anybody that has read those books would agree with you that a lot of those, like Frankenstein or Demon Knights or any of these books that unfortunately didn't make it that long, were great. They were, I mean, when you had 52 new titles though, right?
It was originally, by the way, it was originally the Great 48.
Oh, the Great 48?
And then Jim Lee walked in. He goes, 52 is a lucky number for us. Let's do 52. And we had to come up with 4 books like in a month.
Do you remember what those 4 books were? Like, what were the 4 books that you did?
I forgot what it was. I have a sheet of paper. I have all my paperwork from all my things, so I can actually go through it. I know the ones that didn't make the cut. There was a bunch of books that didn't make the cut, but 4 books got pushed in. I think Voodoo was one of the ones that got pushed in. Something like that. One of those guys. Yeah.
Okay. Gotcha. But it does always feel like you have to get creative with these things. When you mention like what's going to happen when Nightwing gets older, I feel like that is what the reboot era is, right? No, I'm sorry, I forget who I'm talking to. Rebooting a universe era is of like, okay, let's just have another crisis, right? And it's almost kind of become an ongoing joke with a lot of fans, like, oh, well, if you don't like something, stick around 5 more years, it's going to go back to whatever you liked, and that's kind of like how you reinvent yourself. So then Marvel's like, okay, our characters are getting too old. We're not going to go the DC route. We're not going to reboot the universe, but we'll do like little things like One More Day. We'll just reboot Spider-Man's little pocket universe. But the pocket universe, like if you sit back and look at it, it evolves like, that doesn't work. Like there's always that nerd, and there's a lot of us that could push his glasses up going, there's no way Spider-Man would could not have done these things already. Like, so rebooting an entire universe in a way worked with me. And but it does get confusing. It does get confusing. And that was always a thing with DC Comics. Like when even like writers like Mark Waid are tweeting, like, can anybody tell me what is canon anymore about Tim Drake? Because I don't even. That's I said.
That's the hard part, and because. Especially, that's the thing. Once you start to limit the number of books, you tell limit the characters you're working with. You're telling more stories with them, which means you're going to burn through much more history of those characters faster. You're going to age them faster, and you're going to get back in the same hole you were in quicker.
True.
And that's the slippery slope. It's that great start, and then all of a sudden you roll off a hill.
And now you don't have to worry about that anymore. Now you got yours and Frank's universe you're building until you build it enough where you piss people off in 5 years when you do something new for a character.
I always joke. I said to Frank, I know you're successful. Know what successful is when a fan tells me I'm telling the story wrong on a character that I created. That's the ultimate goal you want to reach for. When the fan tells you, you don't understand this character, and I'm like, I created that mother.
Oh no, let it out. You know who else said that? I've heard this from so many creators, and it's amazing because Jerry Conway is very vocal about his creation of the Punisher. And when people took the Punisher symbol and he was like, he was getting fan mail, or not fan mail, I'm sorry, now it's Twitter or whatever, social media. They're like, you just don't understand the character of the Punisher. And he was like, what?
exactly right, and it's the truth. He goes, it's the other way around. It's the people who push the character and the stories away. They're the ones who didn't get it. It's where the story creation starts, is what the purpose of the character was right from the start. But yeah, I get that feeling. But I mean, but that's okay. That's good. By the way, that's exciting for me. I'd rather people say that. That means they care. You know what I mean? I need more people that care. I want people to argue whether or not you're doing it right. That means they're reading it rather than just collecting it for a cover.
Oh my gosh, yeah. And I mean, those times are definitely there. All right, this is a very important question here, because this is kind of the question I wanted to ask, but it was from my buddy News Pooey channel, who was talking about the very first collected edition that you all put out. Was it Pandora from? Hold on, let me just make sure I got that right. Oh, okay. See, Frank Miller Presents has their Pandora Awakening trade paperback up for pre-order. is that the first collected edition from the company? What collected editions might be coming down the line?
Well, that's the first collected edition, and each one of our series will be collected. But we're actually pulling it back for a second because we're reworking a little bit because Frank actually wants to add more material to the book. So we're figuring that out as we speak. So I'm trying to work that out, but we'll have more information that coming soon. But all honesty is yes, every series we do is going to be collected. Ronin will be collected, and by the way, Frank doesn't want to call them collections. He wants to call them graphic novels. He wants them to be stories from beginning to end. Not the idea that we collected individual stories, but we have one big story that's in there together. It's a minor distinction, but a major distinction in how we're trying to approach these things.
And I think and I think that term has changed over the years too.
Yeah.
Like that term of graphic novels has changed over the years because of bookstores. Whenever they started putting these books, these collected editions up for sale, it stopped becoming the comic book section or trade paperbacks section. It became the graphic novel section, all under that umbrella because I don't know, maybe bookstores did research and yeah, because back in our day, graphic novels were things that were originally coming out, like just not collected editions.
Exactly, and a lot of Frank's inspiration comes from a lot of manga. That's a lot of large, graphic novels, or from European model, which is also graphic novel. So we're pulling from all these other places right now, trying to build a sensibility for ourselves. Like I said, we're still early stages. The company's not even a year old. We launched our first book back last November. When you think, I feel like we've been doing this forever. Feels like forever.
It's like everything that you've learned throughout the years.
It's still a learning experience. There's still a lot going on, and I think I mentioned to you in the middle of all this, I wrote a prose novel, which was rather interesting. So it's what I like is I like finding ways to challenge myself still, and finding ways to do things that I don't know how to in a weird way, and it's a learning process. And I think you're always got to constantly challenge yourself. You always got to learn. You can't just rest on what you've done, but constantly got to figure out new ways to invent yourself. And if at the heart of it, you want to be a storyteller, then you got to find new ways to tell that story, and based upon the best ways to reach people. And that's ultimately what we're trying to do with Frank Miller. We're going to try to find and make the best graphic novels to make sure that we reach the most people,
So this prose novel that you wrote, how different is that than what you're writing?
Well, that was different for me because
and I'm sorry, what is it called first?
Okay, first it's called Hide or Seek. Hold on, wait, I got a copy somewhere.
Okay,
here we go. Yeah, the book's called Hide or Seek. Just came out in April. It's
you can hold it up again, so
sure.
You can see the cover.
Yeah, very nice. It's my little baby. It's so what happened during the pandemic. I was at home. It was hard to work with other people, and strangely enough, I actually got reached out to by a producer, a friend of mine. Calls me up. He goes, "Listen, I've been in touch with Netflix. They're looking for a young adult superpowers type of show. You have anything?" And I said, as a matter of fact, I had an idea that I've been kicking around for a while. So I put it together. I called up Kenneth Rockford, who worked with me on Sideways at DC. We put together. We did some beautiful artwork from some of the descriptions. He really helped me pull stuff together. We did a pitch over at Netflix, but the day I did the pitch was the day after Jupiter's Legacy, and they were not in the mood to look at superhero product, as the story goes. And I never forgot this. This is something that they requested from us. We brought it, and he says, the woman goes, "I'm not looking for superheroes, but," she goes, "but if you have anything with kids and motocross, reality based, like them at the beach hanging out, but riding motorbikes in the sand, I'll be more than happy to listen to that." I'm like, what just happened? So I got crazy because I got really sucked into the world, and then Kenneth wasn't available to do any comic work, so I said, let me try this as a novel. The idea is a novel. Never did it before, so I got a couple of writers to help me lay out the story. I had the story break it down, but how to break it down chapter wise, completely different pacing than comics and animation that I worked in.
Okay.
Once I got there, I really was able to craft something, and it was intriguing to challenge yourself to give visual interpretations, because you used to give visual direction to artists about what you would want on a page. Now you have to do descriptive direction in a way that has to be entertaining to read. So that was the thing that was challenging to me, but a lot of fun. It was fun to create this world. I had a basic concept. It's the idea that it's a kid who doesn't know his father's a superhero. The hero gets killed, and the mother and the son get thrown into witness protection because they're afraid that the villains of the characters are going to come hunting down the family. And he gets thrown into a town, and he finds out the town is actually full of the villains that his father put away. And ultimately, there's a whole story behind that, and the kid has to figure out what's true and what's not true, whether his mother's lying to him, and really what his own origins are. And a lot of fun stuff together, and it was fun building that world. And I was building that world basically simultaneously as I was building Ancient Enemies, and it was intriguing to create two different sensibilities at the same time. But it was a fun challenge to do during the time of the shutdown. So it was exciting to see both of them come out now, and it feels good to start to see stuff. I mean, I feel I was behind the scenes for so long, and you feel that sense of ownership to things, even if your name's not on it, except in the indicia. But now I feel that I'm finally getting to a place where I'm starting to get back to where I was back in my reboot days, where I was actually writing things where you were able to put your name on it yourself, which is fun,
Yeah.
So
I got you.
Yeah.
So that book is out already. Ancient Enemies is what?
Yeah,
what
issue 4 comes out next Wednesday. Yeah, it's a fun part.
Now with Ancient Enemies, like I said, those are prestige format books, and they're about 64 pages. Correct me if I'm wrong.
What happened was I did a 64-page first issue, and then I brought it down to 48 pages after that.
48 pages. Okay.
Yeah.
When can we expect our first
collection on that? End of year.
Yes.
Yeah, I'm actually, for my book, I told Frank I want to collect this quicker. The interesting thing is that, because the reality is I've got a 6-part miniseries and I got 4 one-shots, probably going to collect them separately. So I'm going to do the 6-part miniseries together, and then the 4 one-shots as a much smaller collection, mainly because the 6-part story works as a unit, and the one-shots inform aspects of it but aren't essential to the reading. I made sure I covered it in the actual story itself, so you don't feel like anything's taken away. But I wanted to make sure that my collection was affordable. I didn't want to do a big overpriced book to start with, because if I collected it all together, it'd probably be about 400 pages. So right now, the Ancient Enemies books probably sit a little bit north of 300, and then the other one will be about 120. So it'll be kind of fun to be putting both these books out. I'm excited to see whether people pick up on it, because it should make a nice easy flow read because of the way the story is constructed.
Awesome. So trade paperback route is the way that you guys are approaching it, right?
Yes. Everything's different. Frank and I have been talking about Ronin, because he's doing these double page spreads. At some point, we're probably going to want to collect it landscape, so that
like 300, like
exactly like 300, exactly like that. Yeah.
I'm all about collected editions, Dan.
Listen, ultimately, that's the long-term thing. I mean, when we talk about Ronin, the interesting thing about doing Ronin Book 2 is, for the most part, the audience that's out there for 40 years only knows it as a collection, as a graphic novel.
That's the way that I read it.
For 40 years, it's existed so much longer as a collection that people might not even know that it was individual issues at one point. So therefore, we're really making sure that the collections stand the test of time, more so than are just disposable to fill a shelf and sell to a pre-order crowd and then disappear after that. We really want to make sure they have a life, an evergreen life on the shelf.
Because you understood, coming from the DC world of collected editions, how some people wait for these books, particularly in a collected edition, instead of getting monthly. You will always, and I hope always have single issue guys, monthly guys, floppy folks.
Yep.
But there are people now that are like, well, I'll just wait for this to be released in some kind of, and then even then after that, it's like, oh, I'll just wait for a hardcover of this one day.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, and that's the difference. I mean, it's interesting because when we did the Hide or Seek book, we had a choice to do hardcover or softcover, and we chose hardcover. And if you know the mechanics behind book selling nowadays, the folks at Barnes and Noble are really more about soft covers than they are about hardcovers. So if you want to get placement in Barnes and Noble, soft cover is the way to go now, more so than hardcover, unless you're really in the upper echelon of authors, you know. But
Really?
it's interesting. Yeah. Because it's the affordability now. The soft cover is just a more affordable book, you know, and than the hardcover. But the hardcover is the collector book, so you always have a smaller audience. But it sits on a shelf nicer. All my Stephen Kings are hardcover.
I also, that's the way that I own Stephen King too, in hardcover format. So there was a really good question that I love to ask everybody that comes on, that it's my buddy Gabriel. He was asking about Aspire. Do you have any kind of advice for aspiring writers that are trying to make it into comics?
Yeah, I mean, aspiring writers in comics. I mean, there's 3 things. Okay, first one is don't look at just writing in comics. Look at writing elsewhere. Don't limit yourself to just trying to be a specialized thing on a specialized character or specialize anything like that. To be a writer, you have to be able to write anything. That's what I believe. I don't believe a writer should be pigeonholed coming out at the start of his career. He or she has got to be as diversified as possible, and to be working in any format possible to be recognized. Talent can be seen in any format. That's the first one. Doesn't hurt to, if you want to be in publishing, to work in publishing, because a foot in the door is a foot in the door, no matter where you stick it. And there's a good way to get involved and get to be aware of the process and the ways to get in through being closer to the process. That's another one. If you want to work in comics, get to know some editors and companies and get to understand who they are and what they're about. Don't be afraid about owning everything that you do right from the start, because you're not going to get away with it at the start. Your goal is to make a name for yourself and then be able to put yourself in a position where you can control your own destiny after a while. Some people break in right away, and some people don't. Another note is become friends with artists. Go in as a package. Sometimes you go in as a package. It works a little bit better than just trying to get in as a writer, because unfortunately everybody thinks they can write. And these days everybody thinks they can write. So if you come in with an artist, sometimes that helps you. And the other thing too is that if none of those things work, find a way to get yourself published yourself. There's other ways to be able to do it. Even if you got to self-publish or do something, find a way to get it done, because ultimately people have more respect for people who already have been published, regardless of what format or how it was created, than people who have not been published at all. Okay. It just shows your level of commitment and interest into doing that position and that job. And therefore, for you, it's important for you to be able to show that you're able to complete a work, and people can have something to judge other than just to listen to what you have to say.
I really like what you said about get to know editors, because I think that's something that not a lot of people have suggested. And I think networking is very important, which kind of you understand the beauty of that because you come from TV and comics. So you know that networking is very important. And I think that's some really good advice for anybody that's trying to make it in. You got to put your name out there. You may not be ready, but people will remember.
Yeah, I mean, my funny little story is how I first wrote for DC, because I actually was writing for DC when I was interviewing for DC. So Jimmy Palmiotti, a good friend of mine is Jimmy Palmiotti, who long time in the business, writer and everything. And so Jimmy and I were pitching ideas all over the place, and Jimmy had gotten some work on Deadpool, and DC called him up and asked me how to pitch. And we had one pitch that had been rejected, so we dusted it off. We sent it back in. It was a Guardian pitch. And they said, listen, we love the pitch. Could we put a superhero in the book, right? So we took the pitch back, put Superboy in it. So it was a Guardian pitch. Superboy's a guest star. And they came back and they said, listen, we love the guest star bit. Can you elevate the Superboy scene so that he feels like he's an equal member of the story? Went back, rewrote it, and it was a Superboy scene. And then send it back in again. Came back again. He says, we love everything in Superboy. Could you take the Guardian out of the book? True story. And I go to Jimmy. I go, Jimmy, are we writing Superboy? And Jimmy goes, shut up. Turn in the script. And that's how Jimmy and I got the Superboy gig. And so there I am at DC on a separate path. I start interviewing for an editorial position, vice president of editorial. And I'm co-writing with Superboy with Jimmy. Paul Levitz, I'm in a meeting. Paul asked me, have you done any comic book writing? And I go to Paul, well, as a matter of fact, Paul, I'm writing Superboy right now with Jimmy Palmiotti. And I never forgot it. He has this big rack of comics behind him. He turns around. It's all perfectly alphabetized. Pulls the Superboy out, opens it up, looks at me, goes, damned if you're not. He throws it on the table. and this one's for your wife. And my first official job at DC, I canceled Superboy.
Man, you're all about killing things off, aren't you, Dan?
Canceled Superboy, Kid Flash. No, Kid Flash had died right before me, and then Young Justice. There we go.
Young Justice. Oh, you did that. You did the Young Justice. Now I have yeah. And let's not forget Reboot. The
Put it on the list.
Put
it on the list for the hate list, okay?
Right. You're as bad as Starlin, man. People used to get Starlin to write comics when they're killing characters off.
I tried to. I got Starlin to do the Death of the New Gods, and
yeah,
almost. I had him. He turned to this really great Captain Marvel pitch, and I really wanted to do it, but unfortunately, there was a commitment made to another talent that I could not walk away from. So we had to.
Oh, really?
Yeah. But he did a couple of pages. I got a couple of. I think he published them somewhere. A couple of pages he did for as part of the pitch for Captain Marvel. Yeah.
Oh man, what a story! Do you own original art? Somebody was asking about if you had original art pieces.
Yes, I do. I have some original art pieces, but they're all personal. Meaning they have. I'm not an art collector. I collect comics. I collect comics to read. I collect beat up comics for the most part because that way I can buy more of them. I have some art. I have the Jimmy gifted me he bought it from J.G. Jones, the very first Superboy cover that we did. I got that.
Okay.
Yeah, I got that. Jim Lee gave me a present.
He gave you a present.
He gave me a present for my 50th birthday, which I don't discuss because it's a beautiful cover that he did that I own, that I love with all my life.
Okay.
And then I got some great. I got the pitch pieces that Phil Jimenez did to sell the Infinite Crisis idea internally at the company. So he did this beautiful piece. Michael Turner gave me a Supergirl that I cherish immensely. List goes on and on. Got a Tom Rainey Bat Cow. I love my Tom Rainey Bat Cow. Got Shane Davis and Philip Tan gave me some beautiful pages, and of course Keith Giffen gave me some OMAC stuff. So I've got weird pieces of art from all things that we've worked on over the years, and I went out and bought some stuff. I bought some Metalman pages and things like that. Yeah, just stuff I love.
Okay, I love hearing this. I love hearing. Nick's the same way. Like I told Nick, we need to do a show where we.
Oh, Nick owns his collection is insane.
Like I've heard legends of his collection.
Yeah.
And I'm like, okay, we need to do a show where you just show me your favorite.
I think he could buy a city if he ever sold his art.
Yeah, he's I've done a couple shows with him doing auctions for donating the several creators and stuff over the last couple of years, and people keep asking him like, when are you gonna throw some of those pages in here for auction, Nick? Yeah. And he's like, no, I'm not gonna do that.
Yeah, that's the thing. The art, my art's just my art is like my comics. You know what I mean? It's part of me. That's all it's the only way I can describe it. It wasn't bought for financial reasons or anything of that nature. It was bought because or given and bought or got it because it's what I love. And I look at it. What I love is being able to pick something up and tell a story behind it. I love, the idea you could pick something up and go, oh, I got this. And I could tell you a story about why I got this or what it's about. And that's, it keeps you connected. It keeps you alive to all the things that you really enjoy,
Yeah. Okay. This is a good one. This will be the last question, I promise.
Okay.
May or may not be able to answer this one, but this is out of my curiosity too. Hi, Omar and Dan. What was the plan for 5G? Future state. There were so many stories on how it was originally supposed to turn out.
Actually, it was the thought was, and it was actually in the works. it was in the works for a good year and a half getting to it before it just blew up. The plan was this: it was listening to everybody. Okay, this is honestly the truth. What I was doing is I was listening to all the thoughts and complaints. I was listening to everything that we needed to do, and my main concern was how do we move the DC universe forward. And the truth was, we didn't need to kill characters to replace them. That's what the reality is. You didn't need to kill a character to replace them. You just had to show a logical progression. And the reality was, and I just have to explain this, so you got to forgive me.
No, go ahead.
Two types of storytelling. Okay, two types of storytelling. There's the Simpsons, and then there's Harry Potter. Okay.
Okay.
Types of storytelling. Simpsons, 23 years on the air. Bart's still in the same grade. Right? The audience moves through it.
No argument there.
Everything's moving through. Harry Potter, we watch him age and grow to the point that he graduates school and he becomes a young man. Okay? We age and grow along with him. In DC Comics, Superman, Batman, and Wonder Woman are the Simpsons. The rest of the DC universe is Harry Potter. So every time that universe ages and grows, it puts pressure on Superman, Batman, and Wonder Woman, because ultimately all these characters start becoming Superman, Batman, and Wonder Woman. There's characters who are older, smarter, this and that. Everything starts changing around them. It changes the dynamics of the universe. And what forces a DC universe reboot every time is because it all gets so compressed, you have to clean it and restart it and move it back where Superman, Batman, and Wonder Woman are the pinnacle of the superhero line. And then everybody recedes, and then they start to age back up, and they challenge them again. Then we push them down. With me so far?
So far, I think Michael Emmons with you so far. Harry Potter has sex with his best friend's sister. Got it.
Awesome.
That's all he got out of
it. You know what? If that's what the books are about for you, good for you. Hopefully, when they make it into a TV series, they focus on that. Anyway. But anyway, so what happened is we were going to build. So what I did is I created a timeline for the DC universe that basically
everybody tried to decipher that damn timeline. Dan, all of us did.
But what it did, it layered everybody in so that basically everybody ages in the same pace, and it drops every major storyline in, including the universe. And what I did is I broke it up into 5 distinctive generations. First generation was built around the Justice Society. Second generation was built around Justice League. Third generation was built around Justice League International. Fourth generation was built around the New 52 Justice League. And then the fifth generation was going to be the one that we were going to create. And ultimately, it showed how the entire universe moved and people aged out. So it wasn't the characters were dying off; they were aging out the way they were supposed to age out. Not like not like Alan Scott and Jay Garrick that are 70, 80 years old running around like they were 22-year-olds. They were, they were going to move away and step away and allow new characters to rise and tell the story about that. We had a lot of new directions, a lot of new characters, new designs. But my main story was built around what I called my Trinity, which was an interesting Trinity. It was Jonathan Kent, Damian Wayne, and Luke Fox, which was going to be this weird triangle, which was, for you as an X-Men fan, you'll understand this. Damian Wayne was going to realizes because something happens with Bruce. Bruce ultimately, there's a lot of stories happening. Bruce was going to be... Bruce was basically going after Bane for killing Alfred. Joker kills Bane on Bruce's behalf, and Bruce doesn't stop him from doing it. And then Bruce realizes that I've given up all my own values and I want to shut down Batman, and I'm going to hunt down the Joker and end this once and for all. So Bruce leaves the city. Superman, his powers were fading like a battery that won't charge up anymore. He wasn't charging to full extent. So he created the Authority to basically take the places of his powers in the universe. And then ultimately that starts to go a little wrong. And then Damian Wayne ultimately realizes his father sort of abandoned him in his quest for the Joker and decides to follow in his grandfather's footsteps and become the new Ra's al Ghul. So Damian was going to go on this different path, and Jonathan Kent was going to rise to be the new Superman, and then Luke Fox was going to be the new Batman, and all this stuff was happening all around the DC universe as it was restructuring around that. And the big storyline moves us forward to a point where ultimately the older generation is in conflict with the younger generation. And then it was going to be a decision to be made at that point about who is right and who's wrong. And it was a big storyline, a lot of stuff happening. It was all laid out, and pieces of it landed, but without the connective tissue, it didn't hold it together. And when you look at the pieces individually, it doesn't work as well as when you look at it driving one big storyline. And we were trying to build that one big storyline. I had a weekly series that we were talking to guys, like it was I think it was Bendis, Fraction, Deconic, and Rucka. We're talking about doing a series to take us from one generation to the next, to get us out of the fourth generation into the fifth. A lot of stuff happening. I see pieces of it. I can't look at it, to be honest with you, because I know what it was supposed to be, and ultimately what it became is a shadow of it. So I feel no connection to the material as it was ultimately published, you know. But it is what it is. Anyway, does that answer the question?
That's a lot of work, and I could see, like, there were things. I mean, when we were, dude, we saw the blurred pictures that you.
Oh yeah. No. We have. I still got that. I still got a lot of the plans. I got a lot of the redesigns, artwork, a lot of beautiful stuff. A lot of beautiful work.
I didn't know there was a redesign artwork. That's interesting. What could have been always interests me, right? Like the stories that could have been.
Yeah.
And you'll get this all the way back to Armageddon 2001. What could have been.
Now listen, I'm going to tell you right now, all the could have been stories are the best stories ever not told. You know why? Because they're never told.
They're never told, and nobody's there to judge. You're right.
I saw that the other day. It was really interesting. I think it was one of the other websites did a top 10 worst decisions made with Superman, right? And it was number 10 through number 2 were all stories that were published. And the worst decision that was never made was the cancellation of what would have been Superman 2000, the direction that Grant Morrison and Mark Waid were going to take it in. At one point, it was never made. And I'm like saying to myself, that made the list because it was never made. But if it was made, would it make the list because it was made? You know what I mean? It's an intriguing thing, because what we always anticipate and wish things to be, if it doesn't meet that expectation, does that make it bad, different, or just something else? You know, and this is where people get lost, because everybody has such deep knowledge of all the characters and stories. I call comic fandom. We have the frog DNA. Frog DNA. If you watch Jurassic Park, they fixed it. They only had imperfect dinosaur DNA, and they used frog DNA to fill in the dinosaur DNA. We have so many stories not being told properly in comics today because the comic fans know the stories better than the writers that are doing the stories themselves. So what we do is we transpose our characters' actions and behaviors as the way we want the characters to be in that story. Even if it's not on the page, we can project it. So therefore, we see a story that's not being written in a weird, bizarre way. We're looking at things in ways that ultimately we want it to be, and we fill in the blanks of the storytelling that writers are not putting on the page itself. So there's a lot of shortcuts in stories in comics today, because most people aren't even going into any explanation of characters anymore, because everybody knows it so well, they immediately fill it in themselves. How many times do we tell a character origin and people scream, "Oh, I already know that origin"? And my answer used to be, it's not for you. It's for hopefully somebody new that comes on board.
Yeah, no, you're right. And honestly, movies have kind of transitioned that way too. Comic book movies, right?
Exactly.
The last Spider-Man, right? Spider-Man movies, the last the three with Tom Holland.
Yeah,
never had an origin story. He showed up in Civil War because everybody knows the story. I thought, honestly, to me the best origin story that was ever done on paper of a story we've heard so many times over was it 2 or 3 pages that Grant Morrison did in All-Star Superman.
Exactly. And
I love that.
That's all it takes. That's all it takes. If you go through, you used to be able to tell when a new writer took over a book, 70s and 80s, because they would touch upon the origin. And I used to say the only 2 stories that matter for a character, only 2 stories that matter for a character is their origin story and their last appearance. Okay? If you tie into their last appearance and seem like you come seamlessly out of that last appearance, and if you still refer to the conceits of the origin story and what the purpose of the character is as set in the origin, all the other stuff is inconsequential. All the other stuff fans will figure out for you and how it all fits in together. But you got to tie into that last appearance to show that continuity and that consistency from the last time. And you got to be true to who the origin is and understand why the character exists in the first place in order to make sure you reinforce those motivations going forward. If you don't do that, the character gets lost in the shuffle. And that's the problem.
And that can, oh my gosh, you know, like I said, this is really insightful information because I can sit here and bitch about everything I hated about the New 52. I can sit here and be like, you were going to kill off my favorite character, but I don't know what it's like to be a publisher. I don't know what's working. I don't know why you need to reboot things and to make it fresh. You know, people complain about why do we have so many #1 issues? Marvel reboots everything and make it a #1 because, I mean, that is something that you do learn, and like #1's issues still sell. And you have to look at it from a publisher standpoint. Well, I'm sorry, you don't have to, but that is the answer. Sometimes you're right. The answer lies from being the publisher and being in charge of this. And sometimes things are pushed on you, such as the case of the return of Barry Allen. Really quick, this is because I don't know if you had any. This is from Tevia asking why age up John Kent and not keep him as a child.
Yeah, I was going to age him up for 5G. I think they aged him too fast. Super Sons was a book that I desperately wanted to do because I absolutely loved Super Sons when I was a kid. In World's Finest as a teen, I love that stuff so much, and I don't know why. It's just the goofiest stories in the world. But anytime World's Finest had an imaginary story with the Super Sons, I would buy it because I loved it. And so I always wanted to do Super Sons. And that's why when we said Damien's going to be Batman's son. And when we put Jonathan, we created Jonathan as, remember Jonathan's created in Convergence. That's comes out of Convergence. And I wanted to have that Super Sons feel. But, I worked in soap operas, for a while. And I watched a lot of kids age up really fast in soap operas too, just because people want to tell stories with characters that are older, because younger characters, you don't want to put them in sense of jeopardy. Putting the two Flash kids in jeopardy all the time seems really weird for me because they were little kids and you shouldn't do that. It's just a little bad parenting going on in Flash's part.
That's a little bit understated. So yeah, I remember the age up in 5G, and then they went a completely different way with well, not completely. They aged him up. Bendis aged him up in his run. Yeah. And I wanted to say that idea originated from 5G because I was a big fan of Super Sons.
Yeah, that was the logic. That story, I don't know if they ever did it, to be honest with you, because the story pitch was that it ties into the big 5G story. Superboy gets Jonathan Kent gets pulled up to the Legion of Superheroes. And the idea that the Legion of Superheroes were going to train Jonathan to tell him that his father was going to be the cause of a great disaster on Earth, and he had to stop his own father from happening. So he was being trained in the future to stop his father in the present. That was the story that was originally being set up. And by the way, the end of 5G, I could ruin the end of 5G because it doesn't exist. The end of 5G was a battle between Superman and Batman at the very end. And ultimately what happens is Superman decides to power himself up, but by doing so, he overcharges himself. And I always said that the ending of 5G was, if 5G was successful, Batman died and the new direction of the line moved on. If the 5G wasn't successful, Superman blew up and we rebooted the entire line again.
Yes, the answer was always going to be reboot. Boy, you were the perfect guy to go over to DC after this show.
Rinse, wash, reboot.
You weren't killing people, you were rebooting them, dude. This has been, seriously, Dan, this has been really insightful, an insightful look at things happening behind the scenes. Because, yeah, a lot of us, sometimes we love comics and sometimes we read comics, and we look for answers and we look for reasons, and we don't, at least for me, we don't really think, well, okay, obviously this is why. I mean, I think with movies sometimes, there's something happened to the character of Miss Marvel in Marvel Comics. And in my head, I'm like, well, obviously this is what they're going to do because they're going to tie it to the MCU. And it's kind of like that way, if I thought about it back then, I remember how upset I was about bringing Barry Allen because Wally West was my Flash growing up. And I was like, why bringing back Barry Allen? Like, his death was pretty cool, and he's been gone for so long. But I had no idea there was pressure, of course, to bring him back, because you don't think about those things as a fan.
And the series, and the Flash series was successful, because when you get outside of the world, that was one of the moments for me at DC. You know, when I made the argument to bring Kara Zor-El back, which was a big deal, because there was a big undoing of Christ on Infinite Earths, and I had a bunch of people, and they were all arguing with me about, we can't do this, it doesn't make any sense. And I said, okay, I say Supergirl. What's the first thing you think of? Every single person that was arguing with me said Kara Zor-El. So I said, so all of us only see Kara Zor-El as the only Supergirl. So why are we not using the character that everybody recognizes rather than the one that everybody is just trying to move forward with? And that was the thing. And ultimately what happened was that we knew that there was going to be a Flash TV show. Didn't know about any other plans past that, but we knew there was plans. If there was a Flash in a movie, it was going to be Barry Allen too. So we knew we had to get Barry back on the table, you know, and that was ultimately, we had to get him back out there, you know. So,
and it was. Okay. Well, at this moment, I just want to thank you again, Dan, for joining us, for sitting here and honestly making this a very educational interview, because I've learned, you know, through the years of doing this channel, I've learned so much for publishing, that I see people leave comments, like angry comments, and that was me like 5 years ago. If I hadn't known what was going on behind the scenes, how long it takes to get books, why some books can't stay evergreen, why licensing is so important sometimes, and why it sucks a lot of the time. Yeah. But, you know, learning a lot from people like you that have worked there, that were there in the daily grind and making decisions, and not easy decisions to make, you know, that you knew would piss off some fan base, but in the end, it was a successful thing to do. Or vice versa. Sometimes it could backfire on you, because you have to try things that just in some things doesn't.
Listen, the answer, why I love working in TV and comics more so than film, was every week you got another chance to take another swing of the bat. You know, you get a chance to go back out there. Didn't work this time. We'll get them next month. We'll figure it out. You got to be learning. You always got to be challenging yourself. You always got to be doing more. If you rest on your laurels, you die. And comics will die if you just sit back and let things happen. You know, because there are too many other things filling that need. And that was my biggest problem. One of my biggest fights at DC towards the end was DC had to be the leader. It could not be the follower. That's why I don't like books like Batman 89 or Superman 78 and all that, because it might be interesting to a fan, but for me, we're not in charge of that creative. Somebody else took and created that creative direction for that character.
Yeah.
And therefore, I'm a licensee of my own product now. And I never wanted to be a licensee of DC characters from anybody. We had to be a leader, because we weren't big enough to be anything but that. You know, because as the joke used to be, but it's the truth. An opening day weekend on a successful movie made more profit than the entire publishing for the entire year.
Oh, yeah, you are always welcome back to hear my thoughts on why some of this stuff didn't even matter to people up here, right?
Yeah, but we have to be the innovators, we had to be the creators, we had to be the experts. And once you cede that territory, you become irrelevant. And the one thing I never wanted DC to become was irrelevant, you know?
Man, that is a good and powerful point. So one more time, people can find you now at Frank Miller Presents, in that publishing company. You guys are putting out your first trade is unfortunately going to be delayed because
we're fixing it up right now. We're going to announce it soon, though. We'll be announcing that, and then My Ancient Enemies will be the end of the year. You know?
Okay, excellent. And I can't wait for more.
We're not even a year old yet. Yeah, we're not even a year old yet. We're still a little company. We're still a baby.
Well, listen, you are welcome to come back anytime. If Frank ever wants to come back with you to talk about future projects for the company, that would be awesome. You just let me know. I'm always here.
Sure will. So, we're gonna do a big push again beginning of next year for the next round of titles and books. So who knows? Maybe around then for sure.
Okay, that sounds like a blast. And on that note, I just want to say thank you, everybody, for joining us. Hit that like button on the way out. And thank you, Dan. But before you leave, Dan, I have someone that wants to come and say hi to you. So I am ending the stream though, but someone from upstairs, not my wife, but my youngest. Wants to
Yeah, more people
hi.
in the house. Who else?
She's not going to yell at you for killing Reboot. She loves season 3 as much as I did. Thank you, everyone.
Season 3 is one of the highlights of my life. It's one of the greatest experiences.